The first entry in the municipal records of Albi does not read like the beginning of a possession case. It reads like maintenance. Monday, October 6, 1986, 8:42 a.m. A call logged by the Albi Housing Authority notes a complaint of persistent cold in apartment 3B of the residence Saint-Jean, a 4-story post-war concrete block on Rue de la Madeleine. The complainant, Jean-Paul Arnaud, age 41, electrician by trade, reported that the heating unit in the living room was running continuously without effect. The building superintendent inspected the radiator at 9:15. His report states, valve operational, ambient temperature measured at 18.9 degrees Celsius. No fault found. The matter should have ended there. Residence Saint-Jean was unremarkable. Built in 1958, reinforced concrete, shallow foundations. No known subsidence issues. No prior police activity beyond noise complaints and one domestic dispute in 1979. Apartment 3B housed Jean-Paul Arnaud, his wife Claire Arnaud, née Delmas, age 38, and their daughter Elise, age 11. The family had lived there since March 1982. School records describe Elise as quiet, compliant, above-average performance in mathematics. Medical records prior to October 1986 list seasonal allergies and one childhood concussion at age 6. No psychiatric history. On October 7th, the second complaint was logged, this time with the Municipal Electricity Board. Jean-Paul reported irregular power fluctuations between 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock. The technician's report includes a handwritten note. Observed brief voltage dips coinciding with no external load change. Unclear source. Advise monitoring. That same morning at 7:10, Elise vomited before school. Claire attributed it to nerves. She wrote later, in a statement to police dated November 29th, that her daughter complained of a metallic taste and said her tongue felt burned. No lesions were observed. Elise attended school. Teachers would later recall that on October 7th, Elise asked to leave class twice to wash her hands. One teacher noted in the margin of a gradebook, strong smell from her fingers, like copper coins. The smell was not persistent. It did not transfer to surfaces. On October 9th, at 22:47, Jean-Paul contacted emergency services. He reported that his daughter was burning hot and shaking. Paramedics arrived at 22:56. Their report is clinical. Patient, female, 11 years. Conscious, oriented. Skin warm, dry. Rectal temperature, 39.1 degrees Celsius. Heart rate, 128 BPM. Tremor observed in hands, non-rhythmic. No seizure activity. Pupils equal, reactive. Patient complains of noise in walls. Elise was transported to Centre Hospitalier d'Albi. Blood work performed at 23:41 showed elevated white blood cell count, 14,800/L, mild hyponatremia, and no markers of infection. Toxicology screen negative. She was administered acetaminophen and 4 fluids. By 2:30, her temperature had dropped to 37.4 degrees Celsius. She slept. The attending physician, Dr. Laurent Menard, wrote, likely viral etiology. Discharge if stable. Elise was released at 10:15 on October 10th. The first anomaly appears in the discharge addendum, dictated at 10:22. Note: during examination, room temperature recorded at 16 degrees Celsius. Patient reports feeling cold despite fever earlier. No explanation. On October 11th, the Arnauds found condensation on the inside of their living room windows at noon. Outside temperature was 21 degrees Celsius. Jean-Paul wiped the glass. It reformed within minutes. He later told investigators that the condensation smelled like wet metal, a phrase repeated in multiple testimonies. No sample was taken. That evening at 19:03, Elise complained of pain in her forearms. Claire observed bruises. Linear, parallel marks on the inner arms, each approximately 4 centimeters in length, evenly spaced. They resembled pressure marks rather than impact bruises. Claire photographed them with a disposable camera. The photographs, developed later, showed discoloration consistent with contusions 24 to 36 hours old. No explanation was recorded. On October 12th, Sunday, the family attended Mass at Église Saint-Cécile. Parishioners later recalled Elise leaving twice, appearing pale. Father Michel Roux noted in his personal diary, not an official parish log, Child Arnaud seemed unwell, eyes unfocused, spoke to mother briefly. No further action was taken. At 3:14 a.m. on October 13th, Jean-Paul awoke to a sound he described as scraping. He initially thought it was plumbing. In his police statement he said, "It was like fingernails on dry wood, slow, deliberate." The sound came from Elise's bedroom. When he opened the door, the sound stopped. Elise was sitting upright in bed, awake. She told him, "It's counting." Jean-Paul asked what was counting. Elise replied, "The space between things." This statement appears verbatim in the police transcript, recorded weeks later, but corroborated by Claire independently. At the time, Jean-Paul attributed it to fever dreams. Elise's temperature was normal, 36.8 degrees Celsius. Her pulse was 62 BPM, lower than her baseline. On October 13th, at 11:20, Elise was examined by her pediatrician, Dr. Helene Cazot. Notes indicate, bruising unexplained. Recommend observation. Consider stress. Dr. Cazot referred Elise for a psychiatric evaluation out of an abundance of caution. The psychiatric assessment took place on October 15th at 1400 hours. The psychiatrist, Dr. André Villiers, conducted a standard battery, orientation questions, mood assessment, Rorschach test. Elise answered appropriately. When shown the ink blots, she described structures, grids, and spaces where things don't belong. Dr. Villiers noted flat affect but no psychosis. His conclusion, adjustment disorder, no hallucinations observed. That night, October 15th, 23:58, the electricity board logged a brief outage affecting only residents' sunshine. Duration, 17 seconds. Cause, unknown. At 0:06, neighbors in apartment 2C reported loud banging from above. One neighbor, Madame Lefebvre, told police she heard a child crying, then laughing very low. No patrol was dispatched. On October 16th, Elise stopped eating solid food. She drank water and milk. Claire reported that when Elise drank, her throat moved like she was swallowing something thick. No choking occurred. By October 18th, the smell had returned. Multiple witnesses describe it differently. Ozone, wet copper, burned wires. Claire wrote in a notebook, later seized by investigators. The air feels charged. My hair stands when I touch her. There is no evidence of static electricity measured at the time. On October 19th at 4:42, Claire found Elise standing in the hallway, barefoot, staring at the front door. The apartment temperature, measured later by police, was 15 degrees Celsius. Elise was shivering but said she was too hot. When Claire touched her forehead, it felt cool. A thermometer read 35.2 degrees Celsius. 10 minutes later, it read 38.0 degrees Celsius. The thermometer was tested afterward and found to be accurate within 0.1 degrees Celsius. Elise was admitted again to Centre Hospitalier d'Albi at 6:10. This time, the admitting physician noted temperature instability and bradycardia alternating with tachycardia. Continuous monitoring showed heart rate fluctuations between 48 and 140 BPM without exertion. EG performed at 9:30 was normal. MRI at 1300 hours showed no structural abnormalities. At 1417, a nurse documented an environmental anomaly. Room 312 reported cold. Maintenance called. Thermostat set to 22 degrees Celsius. Actual temp measured at 16.5 degrees Celsius. Adjacent rooms normal. At 1602, Elise developed new bruising on her thighs. Again linear, parallel. Photographs were taken. Forensic analysis later suggested the bruises formed within hours, not days. Pressure pattern suggested fingers, but spacing did not match a child's or adult's hand. Pharmacological interventions were attempted. Acetaminophen had no effect on fever spikes. Diazepam was administered at 1840 to address tremors. Tremors ceased, but Elise reported, "The noise is louder when it's quiet." The noise was not audible to staff. On October 20th, at 2:11, a hospital orderly reported hearing scratching from room 312. He opened the door. The sound stopped. Elise was asleep. Security footage shows no one else entering or leaving the room in the preceding hour. At 7:55, Dr. Menard ordered a full toxicology panel. Results returned negative at 15:30. At 1800 hours, a social worker interviewed Elise alone. The transcript includes the following exchange. SW, do you know why you're here? Elise, because the house is wrong. SW, what do you mean? Elise, there are marks under it. They were put there before we came. The social worker interpreted this as metaphorical. No follow-up questions were recorded. On October 21st, Elise was discharged with a provisional diagnosis of psychosomatic disorder. The Arnauds were advised to continue psychiatric follow-up. They returned to apartment 3B at 1640. At 1712, Jean-Paul noted that the living room clock had stopped. Battery replaced. It stopped again at 1719. Other clocks in the apartment were unaffected. At 1803, Claire found wax residue on the kitchen counter. It was black, brittle, and cold to the touch. There were no candles in the apartment matching the wax. Claire scraped a piece into a plastic bag. That bag would later become Exhibit 14 in the case file. At 1950, Elise asked, without prompting, "Why did they put my name under the floor?" Claire laughed. Jean-Paul did not. At 22:37, neighbors reported chanting. Police arrived at 22:55. They found the Arnauds alone. No chanting was heard upon arrival. The report notes, apartment unusually cold. No further action. The first official police involvement occurred on October 22nd, not because of noise, but because Elise failed to appear at school and could not be reached by phone. A welfare check was conducted at 10:30. Officers Bernard Lemaitre and Sophie Caron entered apartment 3B at 10:42. Their body cameras were not activated. Policy at the time did not require it for welfare checks. Their written report includes the following. Ambient temp low. Smell metallic. Child found sitting on floor of bedroom. Drawing. The drawings were confiscated. They depict geometric patterns, intersecting lines forming grids, with repeated symbols at the intersections. Forensic linguists later compared the symbols to known alphabets. No direct match was found. The lines were drawn with a black crayon, pressed hard enough to indent the paper beneath. Elise was unresponsive to questions for approximately 3 minutes, then spoke normally. She told Officer Caron, "They don't like uniforms." This was the point at which the case shifted from medical to something else, though no one used that language yet. The officers advised the parents to seek further medical attention. They left at 11:05. At 13:20, Jean-Paul called Dr. Villiers, requesting an urgent appointment. It was scheduled for October 24th. They would not make it to that appointment. At 23:48 on October 22nd, the Arnauds' upstairs neighbor reported a loud impact, like furniture falling. At 23:52, another neighbor reported screaming. Police arrived at 0:06 on October 23rd. They found Elise unconscious on the living room floor. Her body temperature was 32.1 degrees Celsius. Bruising covered her arms, legs, and torso in the same linear patterns. There were no signs of forced entry. Jean-Paul and Claire were in shock. Claire kept repeating, "We didn't touch her." Elise was transported to the hospital. She regained consciousness at 1:30. When asked what happened, she said, "It pushed me because I said the name wrong." No name was recorded in the transcript. This is where the mundane record ends. The medical file closes with a note, etiology unclear. The police file remains open, marked non-criminal. What follows in subsequent archives is no longer maintenance. The first material indication that the Arnault case was not confined to physiology appears not in a hospital file or a police report, but in a municipal renovation permit issued 23 years earlier. March 4, 1963, 11:10 a.m. Permit number 63 to 117 authorizes the removal of original wooden flooring in what would later become apartment 3B. The stated reason: water damage following pipe failure. The contractor listed was Entreprise Mallet et Fils, now defunct. No photographs were archived. No inspection notes survive beyond a single line. Subfloor treated. New parquet installed. This document would not have mattered if not for what was found beneath that parquet on October 24, 1986. But before that discovery, the escalation continued. Elise remained hospitalized following the incident on October 22nd to 23rd. Her hypothermia resolved within 6 hours using external warming. Blood gases normalized. No infection markers appeared. At 9:40 on October 23rd, she underwent a second psychiatric evaluation, this time conducted jointly by Dr. Villiers and a neurologist, Dr. Simone Auriac. The transcript of that session is preserved in the hospital archive. Portions are redacted, but the unredacted sections show a notable shift. Dr. Auriac: do you know where you are? Elise: not all of me. Dr. Villiers: can you explain? Elise: some of me is still in the floor. At 10:12, Elise began speaking rapidly, describing lines under the house and names pressed into black. Her heart rate increased to 152 BPM. She was administered haloperidol at 10:18. The speech stopped within 2 minutes. EEG monitoring during the episode showed no seizure activity. Dr. Auriac's addendum reads, symptoms do not correspond to known dissociative or psychotic disorders. Consider environmental factors. That same day at 14:30, Jean-Paul returned alone to apartment 3B to retrieve clothing. He later stated that upon entering, he felt pressure in the ears, like altitude change. He noticed the black wax residue again, this time along the baseboards of Elise's bedroom. He also noticed a faint, repetitive clicking sound, approximately once every 2 seconds, coming from beneath the floor. Jean-Paul did not report this immediately. He did, however, take a screwdriver from his toolbox and pry up a corner of the parquet near Elise's bed. He stopped after lifting less than a centimeter. He later told police, the smell came out stronger, like burned hair and coins. On October 24th at 8 o'clock, Claire contacted Father Michel Roux. This is documented in the parish phone log. The reason given: child ill. Request blessing of home. Father Roux agreed to visit that afternoon. Before that visit could occur, Elise was discharged from the hospital at 11:45, against medical advice. Jean-Paul insisted on taking her home. Dr. Menard noted, parents believe environment contributing. No legal basis to prevent discharge. They returned to apartment 3B at 12:30. At 12:47, according to Jean-Paul's later statement, Elise stopped in the hallway and said, it's awake now. At 13:02, Claire called emergency services again, reporting that Elise's hands were turning blue. Paramedics arrived at 13:11. Capillary refill was delayed. Peripheral temperature was 29 degrees Celsius. Core temperature was 36.5 degrees Celsius. No vascular cause identified. As paramedics prepared transport, Elise began reciting what one paramedic described as a list. The audio recording from the ambulance captures a child's voice speaking clearly. Claire Delmas, Jean-Paul Arnault, Elise Arnault, Lucien Arnault, Marie Delmas, André Delmas. The last 2 names belonged to Claire's deceased parents. Lucien Arnault was Jean-Paul's father, still alive at the time. The paramedics did not interrupt. The recitation stopped abruptly when the ambulance passed Rue de Cordeliers. Elise fell silent and her peripheral temperature normalized within minutes. The ambulance diverted to the hospital. Elise was stabilized. At 1540, Dr. Auriac requested an environmental inspection of apartment 3B, citing recurrent symptoms associated with location. This request was forwarded to municipal services. At 1610, Father Roux arrived at the hospital. His official parish log notes only, visited sick child, offered prayer. His personal diary, seized later by church authorities, contains more detail. Child avoided eye contact. When I began Psalm 23, she covered ears and said, "That one doesn't work here." I stopped. Father Roux did not attempt further prayers at that time. On October 24th at 1730, municipal inspectors Henri Bousquet and Alain Riegel entered apartment 3B to assess heating and electrical systems. Their report lists no faults. However, Inspector Riegel added a handwritten note at the bottom of the form. Subfloor humidity abnormal. Recommend removal of section. Permission was granted by Jean-Paul. The removal occurred at 1805. The parquet boards were pried up in Elise's bedroom, starting near the bed. Beneath was a layer of blackened wax, approximately 3 millimeters thick, spread unevenly across the subfloor. Embedded in the wax were fragments of paper, hair, and what appeared to be soil. The smell was immediately noted by all present. Inspector Bousquet wrote, "Odor metallic, organic, not consistent with mold." At 1817, Inspector Riegel uncovered a recessed cavity in the concrete subfloor, roughly 40 centimeters by 30 centimeters, sealed with wax. Inside were the following items, later catalogued by police. 3 candles, black, partially burned, with wicks braided together. A cloth pouch containing soil of 2 distinct types. 1 sandy, 1 dark and loamy. A folded paper with names written in ink. A small animal bone, later identified as a chicken ulna. A disc of beeswax engraved with intersecting lines forming a grid, with symbols at each intersection. The folded paper listed 6 names. They were the same names Elise had recited in the ambulance. The ink analysis conducted later by the forensic laboratory in Toulouse identified the ink as iron gall ink, uncommon by 1986, with trace amounts of sulfur. The paper was dated via watermark analysis to the early 1960s. At 1829, Elise, who was still at the hospital, experienced a sudden drop in blood pressure and lost consciousness for 22 seconds. This coincided precisely with the opening of the cavity, as recorded by synchronized clocks in the inspection report and hospital monitoring equipment. This temporal correlation was noted later but not acted upon at the time. The inspectors contacted the police at 1835. Officers arrived at 1858 and sealed the apartment. Evidence was collected and transported to the Albi Police Forensic Unit. The police report from October 24th describes the items neutrally, referring to them as ritual objects of unknown purpose. No charges were filed. At 2010, Dr. Auriac was informed of the discovery. She added a note to Elise's file, possible psychosomatic response to environmental stressor involving symbolic objects. That night, October 24th to 25th, Elise's condition worsened despite being away from the apartment. She developed linear bruising on her back, documented at 122. The pattern was consistent with previous marks. No staff member had handled her roughly. Video monitoring showed no unauthorized entry into her room. At 2:04, the room temperature dropped from 21 degrees Celsius to 17 degrees Celsius over a period of 4 minutes. Maintenance could not explain the fluctuation. Adjacent rooms remained stable. At 3:11, Elise awoke and spoke a single sentence, recorded by a bedside nurse. "You opened it wrong." On October 25th, the forensic analysis of the soil from the pouch began. The sandy soil was identified as riverbank sediment consistent with the Tarn River, approximately 200 meters from residence Sunshine. The darker soil contained organic matter and traces of calcium carbonate consistent with cemetery earth. Cross-referencing burial records showed that Claire Delmaz's parents were buried in Cimetière de la Madeleine, less than a kilometer away. The hair fragments embedded in the wax were analyzed. Mitochondrial DNA testing, limited at the time, could not definitively match them to Elise, but morphological analysis suggested they were human, child-sized, and had been cut, not pulled. The beeswax disc was examined by a local university historian, Dr. Etienne Maury, specializing in folk practices. His preliminary report, dated October 27th, states, "The grid pattern resembles apotropaic diagrams found in southern French folk magic, intended to fix a name or person to a place. The use of intersecting lines creates a symbolic enclosure. The symbols are not standard Latin or Occitan letters, but may be sigils representing phonetic elements of names." Dr. Maury noted that such practices were rare by the 1960s but not unheard of in rural Tarn communities. The candles' wicks, braided together, were unusual. Wax analysis showed that they had been burned simultaneously, then extinguished together, likely by being pressed into the wax layer. This suggested a single ritual event rather than repeated use. Police attempted to trace the origin of the objects. Former tenants of apartment 3B were contacted. One, Madame Yvonne Pelletier, who lived there from 1959 to 1962, provided a statement on October 28th. "The woman before us, she did strange things. Burned candles at night. Put things under the floor. We complained once about smells. She said it was for protection." Madame Pelletier could not recall the woman's name. Records show that the tenant prior to 1959 was Marguerite Lenore, age 62 at the time of tenancy, deceased in 1971. No family could be located. On October 26th, Elise asked repeatedly to be taken home. When told the apartment was closed, she became agitated. At 11:05, she said, "It doesn't matter. It's already loose." At 12:30, she developed a fever of 40.2 degrees Celsius. Antipyretics failed to reduce it. Ice packs were applied. At 13:15, her temperature dropped abruptly to 34.0 degrees Celsius. No infection markers appeared. At 1400 hours, Dr. Auriac requested a consult with a cultural anthropologist. None were available immediately. At 1542, Father Roux returned to the hospital at the request of Claire. This visit is more fully documented. A hospital chaplain was present. Father Roux attempted a simple blessing using holy water. As he sprinkled the water, Elise recoiled and said, clearly, "That was used already." Father Roux later wrote, "She was not afraid. She was precise." At 16:10, Elise pointed to the floor beneath her bed and said, "It goes down, not up." This statement coincided with a pressure change recorded by the hospital's HVAC system. A brief negative pressure spike in room 312. Maintenance logs confirmed the anomaly. By October 27th, word of the case had reached the diocesan office in Albi. Internal correspondence shows that the Vicar General requested a summary. The response, dated October 28th, is cautious. Child exhibits unexplained symptoms. Possible folk magic objects found. No evidence of possession at this stage. Despite this, Father Roux was instructed not to perform any formal rites without authorization. On October 28th, Elise's drawings changed. Instead of grids, she drew floor plans. One drawing matched the layout of apartment 3B with notable accuracy, including the location of the subfloor cavity. She marked it with an X and wrote, in block letters, "Here." At 17:55, she drew a second X beneath the first and said, "They didn't dig deep enough." Ground-penetrating radar was not used. No further excavation was authorized. On October 29th, Elise experienced a prolonged episode of mutism lasting 6 hours. During this time, she wrote notes on paper. One note, preserved in the file, reads, "Names hold better in wax." The forensic lab completed its analysis of the wax on October 30th. It was a mixture of beeswax, paraffin, and animal fat. Trace analysis revealed residues of myrrh and sulfur. The lab report concludes, composition consistent with ritual candle wax. At 18:20 that evening, Elise spoke again. She said, "You took the lid off. Now it breathes." The police file records this without comment. The discovery beneath the floor did not resolve the case. It altered its trajectory. From that point forward, the question was no longer whether something had been placed in apartment 3B deliberately, but whether its removal had initiated a process that could not be reversed by ordinary means. The church, at this stage, still hesitated to apply formal language. The medical staff continued to search for explanations. The evidence, however, was accumulating in parallel systems that did not communicate with one another. And the environment, both at the hospital and in the SEAL department, continued to change. Silently,